This is a wonderful collection we have at the History Center. Gus Miller might be a name that is familiar to some of you. He operated a popular long-running newsstand in Pittsburgh's Oakland neighborhood, which you can see here on screen. And that's Miller standing on the right. He also served as the Pittsburgh Pirates chief usher for decades. When he turned 75, Gus's daughter and business partner, Myrtle May Miller, began turning his birthdays into public events that were held at the store. A giant cake would be ordered, and here you can see Miller doling out a piece. Myrtle May was responsible for sending invitations to scores of individuals, both here in Pittsburgh and beyond. Local reporters were among those invited to Miller's parties, and newspapers would publish articles about the events, sometimes referring to Miller as Oakland's #1 citizen or Mr. Oakland. The collection we have here is full of responses to these party invitations, some of which you can see here on screen. If you were to look through these, some notable names might jump out at you. Here's a response from Bill Verdon, outfielder for the Pirates. Miller invited a number of members of the Pirates organization, from players to the president to the groundskeeper. Unfortunately for Gus, his birthday coincided with St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, which meant that many in the organization were in Florida for spring training at the time. Here's a response from Edward Litchfield, the chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, who shows up frequently in letters and photographs in this collection. I'll have more to say about Litchfield later in the presentation. Pittsburgh Mayor Joseph Barr was among a number of local politicians to make it a point to stop by the party. Here's his response, saying that he would be honored to cut the cake, along with an image that you see here of Gus Miller, Myrtle May, and the mayor. And here's where things get a little mysterious, because along with these local leaders, there are responses from figures who served in prominent roles in other states and even on the national level. And here's some examples of those. On screen, we have a response from the Postmaster General of the United States. Also, Nelson Rockefeller, governor of New York. He was one of many governors that were invited to Miller's party. And we even have Pierre Salinger, JFK's press secretary. So this raises a question. Miller was clearly politically connected locally, but did those connections stretch to other states and even Washington, D.C.? And I think this image of Miller with his head superimposed on a Pirates player gives you a sense of his sense of humor. He was a well-known practical joker. On screen, you see a response from President Lyndon B. Johnson. I don't think Miller honestly thought LBJ was going to drop by the newsstand for his party. But according to a newspaper account, these responses from notable figures were collected and displayed in the store during the party. So this is likely an example of Miller's playful sense of humor. So I want to provide a little background about Miller and discuss what else these photos and letters tell us about Pittsburgh history. Gus was born Gustav Miller to German immigrant parents in 1881. And here we see him dressed as a newsboy, which was his first job. With his earnings, he would buy tickets to see the Pittsburgh Pirates at Exposition Field. At about age 20, he became the chief usher for the team, a position he would hold for the next 42 years. When the Pirates moved to the new Forbes Field in Oakland in 1909, Miller would follow and open a newsstand a couple of years later at the corner of Forbes and Oakland Avenues. Here we see an image of the grand opening. The name of the store was Gus Miller's Wonder Store. And here's a view inside the store. Along with newspapers, Miller sold things like magazines, books, postcards, cigars, and candy. And here's a map where I've noted the location of Miller's store and also the location of his home for many years, which was a block away on Forbes and Bouquet Streets. Of course, his second job was at Forbes Field, which you can see there on the right. Now, Miller was proud of never missing a day of work at his store. So that meant for most of his adult life, he could be found within these 2 or 3 blocks of Oakland. Over time, Miller and his store became an institution in the neighborhood. One of the values of this collection is that it offers a window into the community of small business owners operating in Oakland at that time. Here's a photo of some of them celebrating with Miller. This newspaper clipping mentions that butchers, bankers, bartenders, and a host of other business people in Oakland, where Gus hasn't missed a day in 50 years, will help him carve a huge cake in front of his store. Here are some examples of letterhead from letters in the collection showing that Miller was connected with the proprietors of many other businesses that existed along Forbes Avenue at that time. Miller's standing in the community meant that he was in demand for some ceremonial roles. Here's an image of Gus and Myrtle cutting the ribbon for the opening of the Oakland branch of the Western Pennsylvania National Bank on Forbes Avenue in 1963. Here's an image of Gus and Myrtle at the Pirates' 1964 season opener at Forbes Field, with Gus throwing out the first pitch. Here's Miller holding a shovel at the groundbreaking of the University of Pittsburgh's Frick Fine Arts Building. He's pictured with Mayor Barr on the right and Chancellor Edward Litchfield of the University of Pittsburgh on the left. Here is Litchfield again with Miller in 1961 at the groundbreaking for what is called, on the back of the photograph, the triple dorms. Litchfield's hands are resting on Miller's shoulders here, and you get the sense from this photo, as well as some of the letters in the collection, that there was a real warm friendship between these two men. You might know these dorms better today as the Litchfield Towers, and here you can see a view of the finished towers looming over the much smaller and older structures that surround it, including Miller's store there on the corner. Litchfield and some local politicians were strong proponents of what was referred to at that time as the redevelopment of Oakland. He sought to expand Pitt's campus by acquiring adjoining land and demolishing any existing structures on it. These developments were followed in the press, and here you can see some examples of newspaper articles from that time. These plans were quite controversial, especially as Litchfield had in his sights the beloved Forbes Field. I have to wonder if one of the reasons why Litchfield was inviting Miller to these groundbreakings was to show that he had support of the local business community for his redevelopment plans. And yet, Miller was cognizant of Litchfield's plans and that they could result in the loss of the Pirates' home and could spell the end of his time in Oakland. In this 1960 Postgazette article, it is mentioned that neither Time nor Tide nor the University of Pittsburgh has been able to dislodge Gus Miller from his systematically cluttered newsstand. And it goes on to quote Miller as saying, when Forbes Field goes, that's when I quit. Some of the letters in Miller's collection shed light on this tension that was in the community surrounding these plans. Here's a part of a letter from Jimmy Jordan, who was a sports reporter for the Postgazette, writing to say that he wishes Gus many happy returns for many years after Forbes Field and other landmarks have fallen to the Chancellor's scythe. Here's a snippet from a letter from Nathan Schwartz, a local lawyer, stating that it was men like Gus who have shown the way to save Oakland from those who would destroy that which is near and dear to us all. Expanding on the sentiment is a letter from James Waldo Faucett that I have pictured here on the screen. Faucett worked at the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania, which, as Sierra mentioned, was what the Heinz History Center was formerly known as. The Historical Society's headquarters at that time was located in Oakland, a few blocks away from Gus Miller's store and the University of Pittsburgh. Faucett, in a very theatrical letter, writes about what he describes as alien intruders that have infiltrated the Oakland neighborhood and who are on a campaign to demolish local homes and businesses. Both Faucett and Schwartz were part of an organized effort to oppose the redevelopment in Oakland. Instead, they argued for the preservation of existing historic properties in the neighborhood. Here's another image of Myrtle, May, and Gus at one of his parties. In the end, Pitt, of course, did demolish Forbes Field, but Gus didn't live to see that happen. He died in 1967, a few years before the Pirates moved across town. But the full redevelopment of Oakland that Litchfield and others pursued was not successful. And the neighborhood did not go through a complete transformation as many had feared. After Gus's death, Myrtle continued operating the store until the mid-1980s. And even after she sold the store, the new owners retained the Gus Miller name for many years.